Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I have Robin with me. And today we're going to be diving into the idea of building trust and how to communicate more effectively as a leader. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody a real quick introduction?
It's kind of like we were just talking, Emma. My first introduction I always do is I'm a dad. I love being a father, but my professional background I have actually gave me the skills to do the most important thing in life, and that is to be a father. And that is I'm a United States Naval Academy graduate. I'm a veteran Marine Corps officer. From there, I went to the FBI, and inside the FBI, I worked nothing but counterintelligence. And so that job was recruiting spies and confidential human resources and people. And I was the chief of the counterintelligence behavioral analysis program for a number of years, as well as the lead instructor for all things recruitment and interviewing and all that at Quantico, Virginia.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for the discussion. And I know we were talking about how cool the idea of being a spy recruiter is, but it also going back to what you shared with me while we were prepping for this, it's all about trust and making sure that somebody trusts that you're going to take care of them, keep them safe, move through that whole process. And so the first question that I have for you, whether you're recruiting spies or managing any sort of other team or people, how do we inspire somebody to trust us or feel safe with us as a leader?
Emma, it's a great question. It's the most important, profound question we can really ask ourselves. And just you using that word right there, words mean so much in how we feel. And when we have congruence between how we feel and the words that come out, that actually is part of inspiring trust. And that's the word you use inspire trust. And there's a big difference when we have a mindset of inspiration versus convincing. Because, just think about this, how this feels and sounds. You didn't say, how do we convince someone to trust us? Because now convincing is about me. You said, how do we inspire someone to trust us? Now, inspiration has to come from within them. So that's the first thing. We have to make it all about them. And believe it or not, I discovered this through life's trials, tribulations, and great humbling moments inside the FBI. You would think that the world of recruiting spies is all about manipulation, subterfuge, deception, and what I call all the hooky spooky spy stuff. But what I found for years and years and years of running my behavioral team, I did 22 years in the FBI before I retired in 2018. And all my team ever did was strategize trust. Because if you're going to inspire someone to share information, if you're going to inspire someone to take action, or even in the business world, if you're going to inspire someone to follow you or buy your product or service, they're not going to do so unless they trust you. Because at our basic primal needs as a Homo sapien on this planet is we want to feel safe. Safety begets trust. And so to your question, it's I do these long narrative answers, right? So the behaviors that we need to exhibit to make it about the other person, to inspire them to trust us, is think in terms of how do we inspire someone to feel safe? And it's really, really simple. The simple to say, harder to do because our ego and vanity and our own personal insecurities get in the way. But it's really simple. It's you want to use open, honest communication. You want to use transparency. And really, really the challenging part, but really the bedrock of it is vulnerability. In other words, own what we're good at, but also more importantly, own what we're working on. Because when you can have that kind of transparency and vulnerability with people, you're doing a really, really critical thing for trust. And that is you're giving situational awareness to the other person so they have transparency and clarity of what they see around the world around them so they can feel safe. And so those are really the keys to make it all about them and inspire them to feel safe with you, which begets trust.
So you mentioned the idea of communication, and I know that you kind of have 4 keys or a framework for communication. Can you share that with us so that we know what you mean when you dive into that idea of effective communication?
100%, because this is exactly what I was doing not well earlier in my life, because when each of us has this, each of us are pretty much born pretty perfect. And then the world takes a really good jab at us and we get some really great trauma events between roughly the ages of 9 and 19. And we spend the rest of our lives overcoming them. And so we generally go into self-serving, problem solving modes. In other words, we get really, really adept at solving our own challenges and solving our own problems. And a lot of times they're using relationships and our communication skills to do that. And what we start learning though, as we mature and get older, is that in order to be really effective, we have to make it about the other person, and we have to shift that focus from solving our problems to actually thinking in terms of that's what leaders do. How do we solve the problems of others? How do we be a resource for them? And so I discovered through another massive humbling moments in my life was that how do we shift our language from being about self to being about others? And again, we can keep the same core message of what it is we're hoping to achieve and what we can inspire someone to do, but it's shifting that focus from ourselves to others, because then we'll get the big four in the brain release. We'll get the endorphins, the dopamine, the serotonin, and the oxytocin. Basically, the brain is saying, the ancient primal brain up here is saying, this person inspires me to feel safe because they're making it about me. They accept me for who I am. They're being present for me, and they're validating me with beautiful, non-judgmental curiosity. And so these are the 4 keys of communication. Number 1, seeking the thoughts and opinions of others instead of pontificating on and on about our own. 2, talk in terms of their challenges, their priorities, their pain points, and all the friction that they're dealing with in their lives, instead of lamenting, complaining, and whining about your own. 3, and this is the anchor I mentioned briefly already, and that is non-judgmental, active curiosity. And what I mean by this is each word has a meaning here. Is non-judgmental, meaning seek to understand, not to agree. You can agree, which is fine, but agreeing doesn't mean necessarily non-judgmental. Non-judgmental means you're seeking to understand the context in which they see the world through their optic, their lens, their generation, their ethnicity, orientation, all these things, and using active curiosity. What I mean by that is just don't be curious about what it is you want to know. Elevate it to the next level. Be curious about what it is that they want to share. In other words, be present, free of an agenda, to hear the words they're saying and explore what they're saying. And then finally, you empower people with choice. Because when you empower people with choice, it goes back to the behaviors of trust. You're giving them situational awareness, and you're not saying you have to do it like this, this, and this. You have options about how you want to proceed forward. And if you're not comfortable with the options I gave you, you can then ask, well, what might make you more comfortable? Again, you're then seeking thoughts and opinions, you're empowering them with choice, and you're making it about them. So that's how we shift that focus from us to them.
And I feel like this goes really hand in hand with, like, sometimes you'll hear listen to understand, not listen to respond.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of that goes like right to that idea of like taking it and not making it about yourself and how you're going to respond or what story you're going to tell. And that, like, coming from someone who loves to like relate to people and like join in on the conversation, that's something I have to like actively work on doing so that I don't interrupt or take away from the experience of the other person. And so I think that those are really great keys on how to actually do that, as opposed to just like the surface statement of like seek to understand. You're like, oh well, what does that mean? Like, how do I actually do that? So that was helpful to kind of dive into in more detail. One of the things that I wanted to talk with you about too is, you know, when we're looking at building trust and communication, I feel like a lot of it breaks down in the hybrid remote work environment. And most leaders at this point are at least leading in a hybrid capacity, if not fully remote. Do any of these principles change or shift, or are there other things we need to keep in mind when we're not able to build trust in the same room with someone?
So nothing changes in the sense of what we crave, seek, and need as a human being. We have hundreds of thousands of years of evolution saying that all these core things that we just chatted about remain present no matter what technologies have evolved, you know, to give us more connectivity. I mean, just think about the 14s and 1500s when they started being able to mass produce things, replicate things on news and print and put things around. That was the first social media. Matter of fact, the witch hunts in Europe started because of that, right? And then it evolved from there, and the speed of communication flow was actually regulated by horses for the longest time. Then a steam engine came along, and every time there's a new invention, people are like, oh, it's a downfall of society. No, it's not. We still seek and crave the same things. And so the key, though, when dealing with our new tools for communicating and exchanging information is to remember the most key fundamental thing for making it about others and keeping that focus and being present and being there to listen and communicate in terms of the way the other person wants. And that is focus on them. We fall into a trap when we're in this world where we are right now, virtual world, and we're communicating, less so in Zoom or on SteamYard or whatever we're using to communicate in person with a live image, because it's harder to get distracted. What happens to a lot of us if we're texting or emailing or we blank our screen out if we're in a meeting is that we start multitasking. We start doing other things. So that's the first thing. Do not do that. I do not care how adept you think you are at multitasking because you have reps in doing multiple things at once. The science is extremely solid, whether you're listening to Simon Sinek or Tasha Eurich, who wrote the book Insight. The science is really solid. We as human beings cannot multitask. It's one thing at a time, all your focus. And when you want to communicate effectively as a leader, as a parent, as anything in life, drop it all, focus on them. Focus on their words, and then you can employ that active curiosity. So, and especially in this world, look at this, from the chest up, we can see a lot of emotion here. We can see a lot of what's going on. We can see congruence between the nonverbals and the things you're saying. So when we see this congruence and we hear it in our voice, our intonation, our tenor, all these things says safe, it says trust. And so we can do a lot virtually. Even if we can't see each other, our voice does the same thing. But keep the focus on the other person, no multitasking.
And I think that's actually a really interesting point to make. I've heard a couple of leaders recently that I admire talking about how they have stopped even taking notes during conversations. And this is a spot where we're able to maybe lean on the technology to help us be more human.
Yep.
So you've got the AI note taker in the background, focus in on the conversation. It will do that part that maybe takes your attention away, keeps you from bopping around to different tabs and that kind of thing. I will say I'm one of those people that my husband always knows when I'm multitasking or trying to do something else at the same time because my brain like flatlines and I'll stop mid-sentence if I'm reading a text message or something along those lines. So definitely lean on where we have technology that will help us become more human too.
100%. It was a really interesting thing that we had to work on in the Bureau and the FBI when I went through our training. And that is, we were told when we're doing interviews and conducting recruitment operations and interviewing subjects, that or witnesses or anything like that, the big thing is they would say, do not take notes. Because, it's distracting to the other person. You might take a note on something they said and they might key on the wrong thing. So it might give off even a wrong impression about what you think is important, not important. So we're told do not take notes. At the end of the interview, summarize what it is you wanted to say, repeat it back to them, make sure you're accurate things. And so we were focused on them. Here's the interesting thing. When you are listening and paying attention and not taking notes, and like, to your point earlier, Emma, we always have these anecdotes or stories that pop into our head that we want to respond with because, and it's okay that we have that. Genetically, we're designed for that as well because we want to share these anecdotes or stories to illustrate and demonstrate our affiliation, that we have liking, that we're in kind, and that we're part of the group because it makes us feel safe because we're part of groups and organizations. So we want to do that. Our dopamine in our brain fires when we're doing that. But here's the thing. When you let go, and here's how you be present. People say, well, just be present. Here's how you be present. As soon as you get that response and that urge to say an in-kind story or give your own anecdote or story, let it go. Flesh it out. Put it out. And so when you're interviewing and engaging someone, when you have something you just can't wait to dive in and share with, even if you don't say it, you're thinking about it. And when you're thinking about it, what are you doing? You're multitasking.
Paying attention.
That's it. And when you zero in and focus on them and you're paying attention and you're listening to the words, here's the amazing miracle of it. You're going to remember everything they said. Mm-hmm. And now, and I'm wholeheartedly on board with you, when you have now AI or even just recording it and then just doing a transcript and then doing a summary of that meeting, it's now a refresher on what you're already remembering. Mm-hmm. So it is double down on really, really good stuff. And that way, and the other person too, I do this all the time. Say I'm on a call or I'm on a cell phone call or taking a text, whatever I'm doing, if someone then interjects and interrupts, first of all, I'm always very kind. It's like, hey, no problem. But hey, do me one favor. I'm focusing on this right now and I need and want to give you 100% of my attention. If you give me 5 seconds to close out this email, I'm all in on you. And so I'll finish up this task right here. And or if they're more important than this task I'm doing, I say, hey, all right, give me 1 second, close this out. All right. And then I'm just focused right here. No sidebars, no other things going on. Show them and give every human being the respect that you are 100% focused on the things they're saying. Because think about it. You be the one person in their lives that day, that week, that month that does that. Who doesn't want you in their life? Who doesn't?
Mhm.
Who won't be inspired to trust you and want to work, collaborate, and be together with you?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a perfect little bow to put onto our conversation. Thank you so much for joining me for the chat. And for everybody who's watching, make sure that you give Robin a follow if you're not already on LinkedIn so that you can stay up to date with everything he's got going on in his world. But thank you again for your time and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.